They came from every corner of this nation. Around 1 million voices raised, now silenced from prison to the grave. There are American citizens sitting behind bars who haven't had a trial.
Right.
Some of them for 2 years, some of them going on 3 years.
There are people that we have willing to talk to us right now. They're scared for their life.
Is it potentially the biggest setup in the history of this country?
Potentially.
What are they still hiding about January 6th? What don't they want you to know? Take a look at what we've uncovered so far on the rest of the story with Lara Logan. The last thing Matthew Perna expected after turning himself in for nonviolent offenses and pleading guilty was for the government to try to add years behind bars at the 11th hour. But that's exactly what prosecutors were planning, only they never got the chance. You had a conversation with the prosecutor. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So he says, let me start off by saying that there are many people in my department that felt very bad that Matthew decided to take his life. I said, really? There are many people in your department, including you, who are the reason Matthew took his life. He hanged himself because of the people in your department. He said, again, I am very sorry for that your nephew took his life. And I said, I hope that every night before you go to bed, the last thing you think of is the name Matthew Perna and the role you played in his death.
Matthew Perna's fate was sealed the moment his face appeared on this FBI wanted poster, his aunt said. Suspect number 73 stood out in his red Trump sweatshirt as cameras recorded him inside the Capitol. Roughly 14 minutes that cost him his business, his reputation, and the woman he planned to marry.
And I just stepped my foot in the tub and my phone rang, and it was one of my brothers. And said, Jerry, you need to get a plane ticket and come home. Matt just hanged himself in his garage.
They broke him.
They completely broke him, and they broke his heart.
And they knew what they were doing.
Yes.
What was it about his case that struck you?
To see somebody that was a victim of our own Department of Justice, and especially somebody as peaceable and caring as Matthew obviously was, shame on anybody that doesn't care how the system abused this poor guy. It's just too tragic. We shouldn't have a repeat of that.
From the start, Matthew saw things that did not fit the official narrative, and later that night loudly called out those he believed responsible.
Antifa was disguised as Trump supporters today, and they were the ones who really led the charge into the Capitol building.
We love the police, but a few Antifa dressed up as Trump supporters have been causing violence and stirring up violence here at the Capitol steps, and they're playing on the emotions of you and every patriotic American. This is not right.
When masked men started smashing windows, protesters objected and stepped in to stop them, taking out this man first, then tackling another who'd stepped in to finish the job, while the crowd chanted. In this footage from January 6, a plainclothes officer from the Metropolitan Police Department, badge briefly visible, was captured talking to a Capitol Police officer and told him,
well, we go undercover as Antifa in the crowd, so.
Do you believe this was a setup? This was an intel operation?
These people came to Washington to protest, but the masses had no intention to be involved in any violence at all.
So you're dodging the question.
I do think that a lot of what happened was stirred up by the federal government. There were people involved that manipulated them.
They were framed.
They were framed.
43-year-old Marcus Priester grew up a stone's throw away from his friend in one of the 5 small communities that stretch across the Shenango Valley. And for him, the loss was beyond measure.
I had so much anger in my heart, and I prayed for God to take that anger away. Yeah, I'll never fill that void.
Best friend you ever had?
Best friend I ever had.
I suppose it's a gift.
I was blessed to be a part of his life. You know, he had many friends. I was just one of his.
Summer was just settling into the Shenango Valley, where the forest reaches from western Pennsylvania into Ohio, when we met up with Marcus Priester. He and Matthew Perna would come here to run the rocky dirt trails, but also to listen and be still. It was a little more than a year since his best friend had killed himself, and this time he was taking Matthew's friends and family on a pilgrimage of sorts to a clearing deep in the forest where Marcus and Matthew's Uncle Ron had scattered some of his ashes and planted a tree in his memory. Wow. This was Matt's church, huh?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Serenity.
For Jerry Perna, in some ways, life stopped when Matthew died. But there was one moment as unexpected as it was comforting, when an honor guard from Ohio stood with them as they said goodbye to Matthew.
That night of the viewing, there were 2 officers there, and they took turns. We were all confused.
And in shock.
Yeah, we didn't understand why there was an honor guard there. They had an American flag, and they did a flag folding ceremony, and they handed the flag to my brother. And after the funeral, my brother said to them, "I'm grateful that you came, but Matt wasn't in the service." And they said, "Matt was more of a patriot than most every veteran we've ever done a funeral for." That's what they said. And they handed Larry the flag.
The words carved into the stone of the highest court in the land still read equal justice under law. 4 brothers from Utah are testing that theory. They didn't go to the Capitol, but like many of those who did, they believe the most powerful politicians in this nation aren't doing their duty. When we heard 4 brothers, better known for blasting their horns than practicing law, had weighed in on the 2020 election controversy and was suing Congress for failing to investigate charges of fraud, we tracked them down earlier this year in the Rocky Mountain city of Provo, Utah, where they're from, to find out what they were thinking.
War puts into power its victor. A rigged election does the exact same thing. It puts into power its victor, only there's not a loss of life and property.
Meet Darren Brunson. Of the 4 brothers, believe it or not, he's the quieter one. He's not a lawyer, but he started suing banks years ago, and he's the legal brain behind the Brunson lawsuits. Then there's Loy, also known by his middle name, Arlen. He's the oldest, once ran for local office, published a pocket constitution with all the founding documents, and at an event, got President Trump to answer his questions on the Federal Reserve.
Hello, Mr. Trump. My name is Loy Brunson. You've inspired. I'm over here on your right.
You can go. That's the one I want to do. Yeah. He's weird.
Not to be overlooked, Rollin Brunson. He's the funny one.
She's looking at me and she's looking at me like this and goes, "All right, I'll take your $300.
With a quick smile and a lot to say.
You got my brother Loy here talking to a gal, and you got my brother Gaynor here. He's wondering what he's going to be doing next.
At 60, Gaynor's the baby of the family, and the only one who made music his full-time career, with a professional recording studio and a talent for drums that rivals his lips. In their emergency petition, the Brunsons had argued that lawmakers' immunity from prosecution violated the First Amendment rights of American citizens. That's because in the First Amendment, the Founding Fathers also guaranteed the freedom to petition for redress of grievances. The Brunsons asserted that meant elected officials were not immune from the lawsuits of everyday citizens. But over nearly 2 years, every court, including the Supreme Court, declined to hear their cases. For anyone but the Brunsons, that would have likely been the end. What's the evidence?
It's not about whether there was enough evidence or not to change the outcome. That's not what this case is about, really. This is
What is it about, Lloyd?
It's about investigating to make sure that the conclusions are sound and correct and true.
Well, I don't believe there was fraud in the election. What if they say that?
Well,
you're putting our democracy at risk, Lloyd.
What exactly are we putting at risk? What exactly are we threatening?
Well, you're threatening people's faith in the elections. This election has already been declared the most secure election in history. And there's been hundreds of court cases that have failed. And you are shaking the foundations of this country, because if people don't accept the results, it's damaging.
You know what I say?
What?
Good. Because your faith should be shaken up. Because if you don't, you're going to see hell pour upon you like you've never seen before in this country. We're fast moving in the wrong direction. Yes, we're going to shake your faith with what is called the truth. Do you want to see the truth? If you're afraid of the truth, then yeah, you shouldn't be here. You should want to know the truth.
The Brunsons are really just a band of loyal brothers who grew up in a time and a family where defending the Constitution was still regarded as a sacred duty, not an act of domestic terror. In front of a studio wall, lined with photographs and legendary faces, we took a stroll down memory lane.
Oh my goodness. Okay, but what about that one up there, the White House? What does it say? Taking a tour at night.
Oh, yeah. The Secret Service gave us a private tour in the evening. Then they took us on a tour of the Oval Office and stuff. It was just us.
Here are the Brunson brothers.
They performed for that same president in the NBC Christmas special in Washington, D.C. in 1988. Taught Regis how to blow the horn.
First thing you have to do is you have to make a buzz sound from your lips. Like, all right, great.
Led the kickoff classic halftime show at New York Giants Stadium.
Music, and it's all led by the Brunson brothers.
Their act drew the attention of the famous and the soon-to-be famous.
We were playing at the Imperial Palace Hotel in Las Vegas. After the show, we would be there and sign. We had our albums, and we would sign them. And this young guy came up and he says, "You guys are so great. He bought an album." And he says, "Could you please sign this?" And he says, "And I'm a musician, and I just auditioned for a TV show, and it's looked like it's going to happen. And it's called, now remember this, it's going to be called 21 Jump Street."
Wow.
And he said, "What's your name?" He says, "Johnny Depp. Remember that."
Are you Trump lovers? Would you be doing this if it wasn't Trump?
Absolutely. In fact, even in the case we're talking about, it has nothing to do with Trump.
That's not what this is about. This is not about the results of an election. This is about violating their oath of office by not investigating an election.
Well,
See, we're asking that both sides be removed, not just Democrats, but Republicans as well.
Many think the Brunson brothers' legal theories are fanciful, not grounded in statutory or constitutional law. They were hoping to settle that at the Supreme Court. Rollins' case did make it onto the docket twice, and so did Loy's.
They have an obligation, even under their oath as Supreme Court justices, to protect and defend the Constitution.
Where does it say that the remedy to that is that they can remove every member of Congress that voted for it and the president and so on and so on? Because over and over and over and over again, the legal opinions are that Supreme Court does not have that power.
We are hit with that question all the time. They have actually broken a constitutional law. And you're saying, well, what law was that? Well, it's their oath of office. Okay, so who gets to judge them? When you break your oath of office, when you committed that crime, you are now automatically, according to Article 3, in the jurisdiction of the judicial branch, automatically. And they get to judge that.
Unfortunately for the Brunson brothers, they did not get to make their argument before the Supreme Court justices. As these letters they received from the clerk of the court show, their petition was denied every time, no reason given.
And you got to remember, sometimes when you go to battle, sometimes you might lose the first battle, you might lose the second battle, but you may end up winning the war. I'm just so blown away by these guys. Anyway, that's enough there.
No, tell me.
Well, yeah, these guys, I mean, the only way we can have freedom as if people want freedom more than life. And that's the attitude that it took to get what we have. Now, everyone that hasn't really worked for the freedom, hasn't sacrificed for it, they're the ones first in line to sell it. And so what these guys are doing is they've given up their time. They are eating and drinking and sleeping this. And they are praying. And I'm just telling you that I believe they need to be heard. And it's so awesome because now they're being heard and you're giving them a chance to be heard.
Did undercover agents or assets for the federal government agitate people to go into the Capitol and encourage or incite violence? In short, was January 6 a kind of setup, more of a Fed-Surrection than an insurrection? It was a moment that will live in infamy. At an informal Stop the Steal rally in Washington, D.C., on the eve of January 6, when people in the crowd turned on a 58-year-old man with a lot to say. That man was Ray Epps.
So I'm going to put it out there. I'm probably going to go to jail for it, okay? Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol. Into the Capitol. No! Peacefully! Fed!
Take me back to that moment. Take me back to the moment when you looked at Ray Epps and the thought came into your head and you said, Fed.
Right when he said that, something clicked into my head. I was like, whoa, this is scripted, because he said the same exact line word for word.
And that's
3
not
times.
natural.
It's not natural. And he kept saying, none of this matters. Tomorrow, we need to go in to the Capitol. Maybe the first time he was being silly or saying something crazy. But when he said it the third time, word for word, I knew there's a strong possibility this guy's a Fed.
To be clear, because it's very difficult to prove these things,
Right.
nobody is saying for certain Ray Epps is a confidential source. He, of course, denies it.
Right.
And his attorney denies it. He's taken legal action against people who say it. And he has many cheerleaders in the media.
Yeah, the New York Times, the January 6th Commission, Liz Cheney.
60 Minutes.
What? 60 Minutes?
Then, when things were dying down, shortly before midnight, we discovered another conversation we hadn't seen or heard before.
I despise Antifa. I've stood him down myself with the Army vets. I respect that. Queen Creek, Arizona. That's where I live. Are you my neighbor? I swear. I live in Queen Creek. I want to choke you, man. Wait, this guy's you antagonizing me, man? Maybe it's because you're my neighbor. Where you at?
Then he leaned in and whispered something he apparently did not want to say out loud.
We're not here to fight, man. We're here to storm. I'm not kidding.
We're here to storm the Capitol. Hell yeah. All right. Have a good night. Be safe. Be safe, brother.
That one moment changed what we knew about Ray Epps that night, when he whispered storm the Capitol before it had happened, and echoed the official narrative before it was broadcast across the nation. It turned out January 5th was not the first time Ray Epps encountered Baked Alaska. You can see him circling during this live stream recorded by Baked Alaska at a Stop the Steal rally in Phoenix on November 30th, shortly after the 2020 election. It appeared to have been scrubbed from the internet. Here it showed Ray Epps pacing back and forth, a short way from Baked Alaska, who seemed to have his attention as he looked over in his direction repeatedly, 13 times by our count. Then Epps stopped and pointed his camera right at him, snagging a photo before putting his phone down and walking away, only to re-emerge on camera roughly a minute later, taking another photo in the same area. Wherever there was trouble to be found outside the Capitol on January 6, there was also a decent chance you could find Ray Epps.
We are going to the Capitol!
The self-declared Trump supporter from Arizona wasn't just directing people.
The Capitol's this direction!
He was at the first main breach around 12:52 p.m. with what the Department of Justice described in the statement of offense from his case as the vanguard of rioters, trespassing on restricted grounds, and whispering into the ear of a man named Ryan Samsel, who's in prison for what he did seconds later. Then Epps joined the flood of rioters who stormed through the downed barricades and breached the first line of defense, according to the DOJ. A short way down the path, when rioters took down more barricades, the DOJ said Epps continued to penetrate the restricted grounds and headed for the West Plaza, also a restricted area. Thanks to his tall frame and red hat, you can make him out amidst the crowd at these barriers, where he is once again in the first group to break through and get past the police. Jim Hoft runs the Gateway Pundit, an online news site that's been a thorn in the side of progressives and establishment censors ever since he started blogging some 20 years ago, when the internet was still fairly new. Few have devoted as much time to covering January 6 as Hoft and his team of reporters, who've published well over 1,000 stories in 2.5 years.
We have video of Ray Epps holding up this huge MAGA sign, steel MAGA sign, and he's actually helping push it. Some of the men who were touching that sign, they're in prison today.
As someone who, people have called me a Fed, I understand how serious it is. So, I say this is allegedly, this is what I believe. I don't have like a smoking gun
that you can prove it.
Yeah, I can't. I do know he was an Oathkeeper.
We did confirm Ray Epps' involvement years ago with the Oathkeepers, as seen in this video from Tucson, Arizona in 2011, where Ray Epps is wearing the t-shirt and marching along. This is the organization that, according to the DOJ, led the so-called insurrection. Kate Hilton said she was at that event with Rhodes and Epps. What made you join the Oathkeepers?
I like the concept and the mission statement, which is revere, follow the Constitution. And it was directed at anyone that's taken the oath to remind them that regardless of what's going on around us, we are bound to that oath.
Is there something sinister in that?
No, absolutely not, unless you think the Constitution's sinister.
So I'm going to put it out there. I'm probably going to go to jail for it, okay? Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol.
He's yelling, go into the Capitol. That's not something I could see him saying. That's totally the opposite of the image that he had presented previously.
In what way?
Well, he was a Marine, very disciplined. They don't cross those lines.
No.
Yet here he was screaming to total strangers to cross that line.
Epps made it onto the FBI's list of unidentified January 6 suspects, but was removed around 6 months later without being charged. That was taken by many as a sign he was being protected, but his criminal attorney John Blishak told Politico he thought Epps was removed in part because he'd contacted the FBI and was no longer unidentified. However, we found other suspects who'd been identified and were still on the FBI list, their pictures updated with a banner saying arrested. We also found Matthew Perna, still on there more than a year and a half after he'd committed suicide in February 2022. The presence of undercover agents and informants amidst the crowd on January 6 has been coming to light and can no longer be dismissed as conspiracy. We turn to investigators like Congressman Loudermilk, since the FBI and DOJ won't comment. He's chairman of the House Administration's Oversight Subcommittee investigating security failures around January 6.
There was one video clip that had made it out in public that some people had claimed this was definitely a police officer. We verified that to be true.
This is the clip recorded on the body cam of the undercover officer in question.
I've never seen anything like this.
He can be heard chanting,
USA! USA!
and at times urging the crowd to advance.
Go! Go! Let's go! Go! It's tear gas. It's tear gas.
The committee has not made his name public yet, but he was identified to defense attorneys as Officer Nicholas Tomasula. There's a video that has police officers on the west side by the fountain yelling at each other, and one of them says, "We're hurting innocent people." And they say, for every one we're pulling out, we're making 10 angrier.
A lot of pain compliance when you hit innocent people.
And not only that, we're taking out one and 10 of them are getting angrier. We're multiplying them by hitting them.
You know, when you listen to that, you have the sense that the offices were set up for failure as much as the protesters.
Yeah. And we've got a video of officers saying we were set up.
They set us the fuck up. That's what they did. They set us up. They set up 64.
Oh, absolutely.
And then they asked y'all to come 2 hours later. They set us up.
They needed everybody right away.
Nah, right away. They set us the fuck up. So now we ain't got shit. We ain't got a motherfucking thing. They set us the fuck up.
Is it potentially the biggest setup in the history of this country?
Potentially.
One of the greatest crimes against the American people.
That's why it's so important to get the truth with this. That's what we're working for. And the cover-ups that happened after January 6th is what I'm really after as well.
What about the Republicans involved in those cover-ups? I know it's hard for you to address those things. This is your own party, but this is the reality.
We're going to go where evidence leads.
No matter what.
No matter what.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Yes.
What happens then at that moment when you find yourself inside the tunnel? What's the first thing you remember happening?
I was just trying to stand up and not be trampled. That's where my focus was until the hit to the head.